You know those moments when the world tilts on a single sentence? When 6 words spoken by a child rewrite everything you thought you knew about power, loyalty, and ghosts you buried 15 years ago. For Chairman Han Jae-sung, that moment arrives on a Thursday morning at 8:17 a.m., delivered by a little black girl in a worn blue jacket who shouldn't know his name, shouldn't know this place, and definitely shouldn't be pointing at the ink on his forearm saying, "My dad had this same tattoo." What happens next isn't about organized crime, or territorial wars or money laundering through legitimate fronts. It's about the debts carved into skin, the promises made to dead men, and what happens when the past walks through your door asking for the one thing you can't refuse. The Silver Crane Diner doesn't look like a place where empires are maintained. No belvitroups. No bodyguards at the door. Just formica tables, coffee that's been sitting too long, and waitresses who've learned not to ask questions. But power doesn't always announce itself with chrome and marble. Sometimes it just settles, makes itself comfortable, becomes routine. Every Thursday at exactly 8:15 a.m., 7 Korean men in suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent occupy the same corner booth. Same order. Same silence. Same unspoken understanding that this 2-hour window belongs to them. At the center sits Chairman Han Jae-sung, mid-50s, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight he's accumulated. Salt and pepper hair cut with precision. The kind of man who stopped needing to scan a room 2 decades ago because the room learned to adjust to him instead. His left forearm rests on the table as he lifts a porcelain coffee cup, black, unsweetened, imported from a roaster in Seattle that doesn't take orders from just anyone. Ink covers the visible skin. A black serpent coiled around a broken compass. The creature's scales are rendered in geometric precision, each one a tiny obsidian shard. The compass itself is cracked clean through the center, its needle snapped in half, pointing nowhere. No one at this table has ever asked what it means. No one needs to. Around him, conversation flows in careful code. Shipping manifests that aren't about cargo. Real estate acquisitions that involve more than paperwork. Names mentioned only by implication, problems discussed in metaphor. The language of men who understand that walls have ears but know how to speak anyway. Then, the bell above the entrance rings. Bright. Cheerful. Completely wrong for this moment. A little black girl pushes through the door alone. She can't be more than 10 years old. Blue jacket that's seen too many winters, zipper halfway up. Hair pulled into a puff that started to fray at the edges. White sneakers scuffed at the toes, laces double knotted but still dragging. The conversation doesn't stop immediately. Not until she moves. She doesn't hesitate. Doesn't scan the room looking for permission, or an adult to guide her. Just walks straight toward their booth with the kind of certainty that makes grown men uncomfortable. One of Han's lieutenants turns, irritation flickering across his face before it freezes into something else. The others follow his gaze. Words die mid-sentence. Coffee cups pause halfway to lips. Han's hand goes still, porcelain suspended in air. The girl doesn't ask if the seat is taken. Doesn't introduce herself. Just climbs onto the bench opposite Han Jae-sung, knees tucking beneath her, small hands pressing flat against the worn leather. 7 pairs of eyes lock onto her. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she looks down at Han's forearm. Really looks. The way someone studies a map they've seen before, tracing familiar landmarks to make sure they're in the right place. Her gaze fixes on the serpent. The broken compass. The needle pointing nowhere. Then she lifts one small finger and points directly at the ink. Her voice comes out clear. Steady. Too steady for a child who just walked into a room full of men who make people disappear. My dad had this same tattoo. The room doesn't just go quiet. It goes absent. Sound doesn't fade. It evacuates. As if the air itself decided this moment deserves a vacuum. Hello my friends and loved ones. Thanks for joining me on this beautiful story. As we continue this story, kindly take a moment to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and I love to always hear from you. Where are you watching from and what time is it at your end right now? Thank you for subscribing. Now let's continue. Han Jae-sung lowers his cup with deliberate control. Porcelain meets saucer with a soft click that echoes like a gunshot in church. That's not possible, someone whispers in Korean. Voice stretched thin with disbelief. Han doesn't answer. His eyes stay locked on the girl, not with threat, not with anger, but with something that makes the men around him more uneasy than violence ever could. Recognition. The kind that crawls up from graves you thought sealed. "What is your name?" he asks. Each word placed carefully, like steps across ice. "Maya." "And your father?" She swallows once. "The only crack in her armor." "Elias Carter. But he said people like you called him Northbound." The name detonates. Tank, Han's enforcer, built like a steel vault with a face to match, jerks back as if physically struck. His water glass tips. Ice scatters across polished wood in a cascade of sound too loud for the silence. Another man stands so fast his chair scrapes floor. A third goes pale, hand moving instinctively toward his jacket before stopping mid-reach. Someone whispers something that might be prayer, might be curse. The line between them blurred beyond recognition. Northbound. The ghost name. The legend whispered about in rooms like this but never confirmed. The man who wore the serpent and broken compass before anyone else. The one who didn't lead, he cleared the path. Who walked into danger so others wouldn't have to. The man who vanished 15 years ago without a word, without a trace, without explanation. Chairman Han Jae-sung stands. The movement alone is enough to reset the room's gravity. When he steps out of the booth and kneels in front of Maya, when his knee touches the diner floor, the world tilts. His men freeze. A few look away as if witnessing something too sacred to observe. Han has knelt for no one in 20 years. Not for rivals. Not for authorities. Not for profit or threat or negotiation. But he kneels now. "Where is your father, Maya?" His voice drops to something almost gentle, almost human. Her eyes don't waver, don't fill with tears. Just deliver truth with the brutal efficiency of a blade. He's gone. 2 months now. He didn't come back from work one night. The words are simple. The damage is total. Han closes his eyes. Just once. A blink that carries the weight of 15 years' worth of questions finally answered in the worst possible way. Northbound had been his exit strategy. His insurance policy. The man who handled problems that could never, ever trace back. The one who knew where all the bodies were buried, literally and metaphorically, and chose to disappear rather than become leverage. "You weren't supposed to know about us," Han says quietly. "My dad didn't want me to." Maya's voice stays level. "But when my mom got really sick, he showed me something." She reaches into her blue jacket, too slow to be a threat, too deliberate to be casual, and pulls out a photograph. Old. Creased. Soft with age and repeated handling. 3 men in dark suits standing beside a black sedan at night. City lights bleeding across wet pavement behind them. One of them younger, sharper, with the hungry edge of someone still climbing. Han recognizes himself immediately. Maya flips the photo over. On the back, written in careful block letters that Han would know anywhere. "If anything happens to me, find the man with the broken compass." Han's hand trembles. It's the first crack in a perfect facade maintained for 2 decades. "What do you want from me?" he asks, though he already knows. Already feels the weight settling onto shoulders built to carry it. Maya meets his eyes with a directness that would make most adults uncomfortable. "My mom's in the car outside. She can't breathe right anymore. The hospital says we need money we don't have for treatments. And some men came to our apartment last night. They said my dad owed them something. They gave us 3 days." Around the table, phones appear without a word being spoken. Messages sent in code before orders are even given. Han stands, the movement deliberate, ceremonial. He removes his suit jacket, Italian wool, worth more than most monthly salaries, and places it gently over Maya's shoulders. It swallows her completely, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips. "No one," Han says, voice returning to the steel that built his reputation, "is taking anything from you. Not today. Not ever." One of his men opens his mouth to speak. "Chairman." Han raises one finger. Silence returns like a summoned servant. "Northbound chose this tattoo," Han says, touching the broken compass on his forearm. "It doesn't mean power. It doesn't mean control. It means direction. It means walking into the dark so someone else doesn't have to. It means sacrifice for a future you'll never see." He looks down at Maya, this child who shouldn't exist, who carries proof of debts he thought time had forgiven. That sounds like my dad, she says softly. Han turns to his men. His voice drops into command mode, the tone that moves mountains and makes problems disappear. Bring her mother inside. Call Dr. Seo. Tell him to clear the private wing at Mercy General. Find out who came to their apartment. I want names, addresses, and financial records within the hour. The diner transforms. Chairs move. Doors open. The machinery of power shifts from idle to operational in seconds. But to understand why Chairman Han Jae-sung would kneel for a child, why 6 words could shatter 15 years of carefully constructed distance, you need to understand what the broken compass really means. You need to understand the night it was earned. The night northbound became more than a man. The night he became a direction. Busan. 20 years ago. The docks smelled like salt, diesel, and blood money. Han Jae-sung was 33 then. Younger. Sharper. Still hungry in the way men are before they learn that appetite can kill you. He'd just brokered the deal that would make him untouchable. A shipping route that connected 3 syndicates across 2 continents. Clean money from dirty hands. The kind of arrangement that required trust no one in this business actually possessed. Which is why the meeting was held at midnight on Pier 9. Surrounded by shipping containers and men with guns who'd been paid to look the other way. Elias Carter stood 3 feet behind Han's right shoulder. Not bodyguard. Not muscle. Something else entirely. He was American. Black. Built lean but solid, like a blade designed for precision rather than display. No one knew how he'd ended up in Han's orbit. Only that when Han moved, Elias moved. When Han spoke, Elias listened for what wasn't said. They're late, Elias said quietly, his Korean flawless but accented just enough to mark him as foreign. They're testing, Han replied. Or preparing. Han smiled without warmth. You always assume the worst. That's why you're still alive. The other party arrived 15 minutes later. 6 men led by a lieutenant named Cho who smiled too much and blinked too little. The negotiation lasted 20 minutes. Terms agreed. Money exchanged in briefcases that never quite left anyone's sight. Then Cho's smile widened. There's one more thing, he said. That's when Elias moved. Not toward the threat. Between Han and the blade that appeared in Cho's hand like a magic trick gone wrong. The knife went in below Elias's ribs. The sound was softer than expected. Vet. Final. Elias caught Cho's wrist on the way out, twisted hard enough to hear bone snap, and drove his elbow into the man's throat before the betrayal could spread to the others. By the time Han's men reacted, 3 of Cho's crew were down. The other 3 were running. Elias dropped to one knee, hand pressed against his side, blood running black between his fingers. You're going to want to move, he said calmly, like he was suggesting a better restaurant. They'll be back with reinforcements in 10 minutes. Han knelt beside him. You're bleeding out. I'm aware. Why did you? Because you're supposed to live longer than tonight. Elias's voice didn't waver. Didn't shake. That's the job. They made it to Dr. Seo's illegal clinic with 6 minutes to spare. Elias survived on stubbornness and spite. 3 weeks later, when he was steady enough to stand, Han brought him to the tattoo artist who only worked by appointment, who only worked for people who understood that ink meant commitment. You saved my life, Han said. Elias shrugged. You pay well. This isn't about payment. Then what is it about? Han gestured to the artist. A mark. So people know what you are. And what am I? Han met his eyes. The reason I don't walk into rooms alone anymore. The reason I don't take the direct route. You're not my protection. You're my direction. You see the danger before it arrives. You walk the path so I know it's clear. The artist worked for 4 hours. A black serpent coiled around a compass. The needle deliberately broken. Snapped clean through. Why broken? Elias asked, watching the ink settle into his skin. Because you don't follow where the world tells you to go, Han said. You choose your own north. Even when it costs you. Elias looked at the tattoo. At the serpent. At the fractured needle pointing nowhere and everywhere. Northbound, he said quietly. What? That's what you should call me. Not a name. A direction. Han smiled. Northbound. That night, Han got the same tattoo on his own forearm. 2 broken compasses. 2 men who chose their own north. For 15 years, they moved through the underworld like ghosts with purpose. Elias always 3 steps ahead, always seeing the knife before it emerged from the dark. Until the night Elias didn't come back. No body. No note. No explanation. Just absence where certainty used to be. Han searched for 6 months. Found nothing. Eventually accepted what the silence meant. Some directions led away from everything. Even the people who need you most. Now kneeling in a diner in front of a 10-year-old girl wearing his jacket, Han understood. Northbound hadn't run. He'd been walking his own path the whole time. Toward a daughter who'd need protection he could never provide himself. Toward a man who owed him a debt that could never be calculated. You weren't supposed to know about us, Han said softly, the words carrying 20 years of weight. Maya's eyes didn't leave his. My dad said some compasses break on purpose, she replied. So you have to find your own way home. Even dead, you're still teaching me, old friend. Maya's hands were small against the diner table. Too small to be carrying what she carried. My dad didn't talk about his past, she said. Not the real one. He'd tell me stories about working construction, about how he met my mom at a church barbecue, about learning to braid hair by watching YouTube videos. She paused, fingers tracing the edge of the photograph she'd placed between them. But 6 months ago, when Mom got her diagnosis, he sat me down. Told me there was something I needed to know. Just in case. Han didn't move. Didn't speak. Just listened the way Northbound had taught him to listen, for what lived beneath the words. He said he used to work for someone important. Someone dangerous. Someone who'd remember him if I ever needed help that normal people couldn't give. She pushed the photograph forward. He made me memorize this place. The Silver Crane Diner. Thursday mornings. 8:15. He said you'd be here. That you're always here. Han picked up the photograph with hands that had signed execution orders without trembling. Now they shook. 3 men in dark suits. Night behind them, city lights reflecting off water. The black sedan's hood still warm from whatever business they'd just finished. On the left, Elias Carter. Younger. Not smiling, but not hard either. Just present. In the center, Han himself at 34. Hungry. Ambitious. Still believing that power was something you took rather than something you earned. On the right, Minacio. Han's former lieutenant. Dead now. Murdered during a territorial dispute 7 years back. The photograph was a ghost lineup. 2 dead. 1 kneeling in a diner. Han turned it over. The handwriting was unmistakable. Elias's careful block letters, each one formed with the precision of a man who understood that words could be weapons or lifelines depending on how you aimed them. If anything happens to me, find the man with the broken compass. His debt to me is absolute. He will honor it. Northbound. The ink had faded but the promise hadn't. Memory rising like floodwater. Why do you stay? He'd asked Elias once, years into their partnership. You could vanish tomorrow. Start over somewhere I'd never find you. Elias had looked at him with those steady eyes. Because someone has to make sure you walk the right direction. And because debts like ours don't expire. They compound. What debt? The one where I owe you my purpose, Elias said. And you owe me your life. Seems fair. Now Han understood. Northbound hadn't disappeared to escape. He'd disappeared to live. To build something clean. To give a daughter the future men like them never got to have. But he'd kept the insurance policy. Just in case. My mom's name is Diana, Maya said, her voice pulling Han back to the present. She teaches 2nd grade. Or she did, before the treatments made her too tired. The hospital says there's a clinical trial that might work, but our insurance won't cover it. We need $40,000 by next week or they remove her from the list. Around the table, Han's men had gone still. Listening. Calculating. There's more, Maya continued, and her voice finally cracked. Just a fracture, quickly sealed. 3 nights ago, 2 men came to our apartment. They said my dad borrowed money before he died. That the debt transfers to family. They want $15,000 by Saturday, or they take the apartment. Did they give names? No. But one had a scar. Here. She traced a line down her left cheek. And they both spoke Korean when they thought I wasn't listening. A phone appeared in Tank's hand without Han needing to look. Another in Min-jae's grip. Silent coordination. The machinery of power recognizing its cue. That debt doesn't exist, Han said quietly. Each word a nail in someone's coffin. Your father owed nothing. These men are lying. How do you know? Because Northbound never borrowed. He only paid forward. Han stood. The movement reset the room's gravity. He removed his suit jacket, Brioni, navy silkwool blend, worth more than most people earned in a month, and draped it over Maya's shoulders. It swallowed her, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips like wings she hadn't grown into yet. You're not leaving here alone, he said. Not now. Not ever. He turned to Tank. Bring her mother inside. Carefully. To Min-jae, call Dr. Seo. Clear the private wing at Mercy General. Tell him it's a northbound case. The name moved through them like electricity. To J1. Find the men who visited their apartment. I want names, affiliations, and current locations within 2 hours. And find out who sent them. His voice dropped to something colder. No one collects debts from ghosts. Not in my city. The men scattered. Purpose ignited. Maya looked up at him, still wrapped in his jacket, still holding the photograph. Why are you helping us? Han knelt again, meeting her eyes. Because your father once stood between me and a knife, he said simply. Because some debts don't die. They just wait for the right moment to be honored. He touched the serpent on his forearm. The broken compass. And because men like me don't get many chances at redemption. Your father just gave me one. Outside, an engine started. Inside, the world began to shift. Power moving for the first time in 15 years towards something other than itself. The private wing of Mercy General didn't feel like a hospital. No fluorescent bus. No disinfectantes tin. Just soft lighting, hardwood floors, and the kind of quiet that money buys when it wants suffering to be dignified. Diana Carter lay against white pillows that seemed to swallow her. Oxygen hissed softly through a nasal cannula. Her skin held that papery quality of someone whose body had been at war with itself too long. But her eyes were sharp. Defiant. When Han entered, alone, no entourage, jacket draped over one arm. Those eyes tracked him like a weapon acquiring target lock. No, she said. Her voice was weak, but the word wasn't. Han stopped at the foot of the bed. Mrs. Carter. No, she repeated, trying to sit up. The effort cost her. Maya rushed to adjust the pillows, but Diana waved her off. We don't want charity. We don't need saving. And we definitely don't need help from. She gestured vaguely at him. From whatever you are. Han didn't flinch. Your husband spoke about me. He told me enough. Diana's jaw tightened. Told me what you did for a living. What he used to do. He wanted me to understand that he'd left that world behind. That we were clean. You are clean, Han said simply. Then why are you here? Because your husband saved my life. Multiple times. In ways that can't be quantified or repaid. Diana laughed, bitter, sharp as broken glass. So this is guilt? Conscience finally catching up to men who don't have one. This is debt, Han corrected. And not the kind you're thinking of. He moved closer. Not threatening. Not imposing. Just present. Mrs. Carter, I'm not a good man. I won't pretend otherwise. But your husband, Elias, he wasn't just my protection. He was my direction. I don't understand. Han touched the tattoo on his forearm. The black serpent. The broken compass. 20 years ago, I was building an empire on bodies and bribes. I believed power meant taking everything and giving nothing. I was headed somewhere dark. Somewhere I wouldn't have come back from. He paused, memory pulling at him. Elias didn't stop me with violence. He stopped me by asking questions I didn't want to answer. Where does this end? What are you building toward? Who benefits when you're done? Diana's expression softened. Just slightly. That sounds like him. He made me realize I wasn't leading. I was falling. And he spent 15 years making sure I didn't hit bottom. Han's voice dropped. Then he disappeared. And I've been walking the wrong direction ever since. He left to protect us, Diana said quietly. From your world. From what it would do to Maya if she grew up knowing. I know. He trusted you enough to send us here. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. Even knowing what you are. What you do. He trusted you with the only thing that mattered to him. The weight of it settled into the room like snow. Han met haar gaze. This isn't charity, Mrs. Carter. This is me honoring the only debt I have left that actually means something. Your husband gave me direction when I had none. The least I can do is make sure his family doesn't walk alone. Diana was quiet for a long moment. You can't buy your way into heaven, Mr. Han. I'm not trying to. A ghost of a smile. I'm just trying to make sure the man who saved me didn't die thinking his sacrifice was wasted. Diana closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted. Okay, she whispered. Han visited every evening after that. No bodyguards. No ceremony. Just him. Sometimes he sat in silence. Sometimes he brought reports on treatment progress. Sometimes he simply existed in the same space as people who didn't fear him, who saw him as obligation rather than threat. On the 5th night, Maya was curled in the chair beside her mother's bed, homework scattered across her lap. She looked up when Han entered, studied him the way she'd studied the tattoo that first morning, then asked the question that mattered. Were you bad? Han sat down slowly, considered the weight of honesty. I was dangerous, he said carefully. There's a difference. What's the difference? Bad people hurt others because they want to. Dangerous people hurt others because they believe they have to. He paused. Your father taught me that the real question isn't whether you're dangerous, it's what direction you point that danger. Maya absorbed this. Processing. Did my dad stop you from being bad? Han smiled. Genuine. Sat. He reminded me where I was supposed to be going. And where was that? Han looked at Diana, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. At Maya, safe and fed and asking questions that assumed tomorrow would come. Here, he said quietly. I just didn't know it yet. The evenings fell into rhythm. Han would arrive at 7:30 p.m. after the nurses had finished their rounds and Maya's homework was spread across the small table by the window. He'd sit in the chair that had become his dark leather, positioned where he could see both the door and the cityscape beyond. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. On the 7th night, Maya broke the comfortable silence. My teacher said there are bad people and good people. That it's easy to tell the difference. Han glanced up from the financial report he'd been pretending to read. Your teacher is wrong. How? Because most people are both. They just choose which one to be in any given moment. He set the report aside. The real measure isn't what you are. It's what you do when no one's watching. When there's no reward for being good and no punishment for being bad. Maya considered this, pencil tapping against her math worksheet. What did my dad do? Han leaned back. Let memory rise. Seoul. 14 years ago. A warehouse in Gangnam. 3 a.m. The kind of meeting where violence was expected, almost traditional. A rival syndicate had been moving product through Han's territory without permission. The disrespect required response. Han's lieutenants wanted blood. We make an example, Menesio had said, eager and young. Send a message no one forgets. Han had nodded, already calculating casualties, planning the narrative. Then Elias spoke. What happens after? Everyone turned. After what? Han asked. After you kill them. After you send your message. What changes? They learn respect. No. Elias's voice was calm. Certain. They learn fear. And fear doesn't build empires, it builds powder kegs. You win this fight, lose the next 3. Their allies retaliate. Your people die protecting territory that wasn't worth defending. 5 years from now, you're still putting out fires. Then what do you suggest? Elias had smiled. Not warmly. Tactically. Audit them. Find the financial holes. Expose their operation to the people they're trying to hide from. Let the law do what violence can't. Make them irrelevant. It had taken 6 weeks. No blood. No bodies. Just carefully leaked documents, anonymous tips, and pressure applied where structures were already weak. The rival syndicate collapsed under investigation. Their leaders went to prison for tax evasion, not territory wars. Han's reputation grew, not as brutal, but as untouchable. Your father understood something most people in my business don't, Han said, returning to the present. Violence is easy. It's the lazy answer. Real power is knowing when not to use it. Maya absorbed this. Then, is that what you're doing now? With the men who came to our apartment. Han's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. What makes you think I'm doing anything? Because Mom's bills keep getting paid. Because 2 days ago, those men stopped coming. Because you look like someone who's waiting for reports. Smart kid. Northbound's daughter indeed. They were loan sharks, Han said carefully. Operating without legitimate license. Targeting immigrants and widows. Families who couldn't fight back. And last week, the Financial Services Commission received an anonymous tip. Very detailed. Very thorough. He met her eyes. Sometimes justice wears a badge. Sometimes it wears an audit. No violence? No violence. Maya was quiet for a moment. My dad would have done it the same way. I know. He taught me how. The next evening, Tank appeared in the hospital corridor as Han was leaving. Spoke low in Korean. The loan operations finished. 3 arrests. Assets frozen. The families they targeted are being contacted about debt forgiveness. The men who visited Maya? One turned himself in this morning. The other disappeared, probably running before the same thing happens to him. Tank paused. It's clean. No connection to us. Han nodded. Good. Chairman. Tank hesitated. Unusual for him. Why are we doing this? Going this far for one family. Han looked back toward Diana's room. Toward the girl inside who asked questions that assumed he had answers worth hearing. Because a long time ago, a man showed me that power without direction is just destruction waiting to happen. And because he stopped. Started again. Because for once, I want to be the kind of dangerous that protects instead of threatens. Tank nodded slowly. Understanding settling in. 3 days later, Maya sat beside her mother's bed while Diana slept, breathing easier now that the new treatment was working. She looked at Han, who'd brought dinner, real food, not hospital meals, and said it out like it was normal. Like this was just what people did. You were going the wrong way, Maya said suddenly. Before my dad. You were heading somewhere bad. Han paused, chopsticks halfway to his mouth. Yes. And he didn't stop you. He just. She searched for the words. He helped you change direction. Han set the chopsticks down. Met her eyes. That's exactly what he did. Is that why the compass is broken? Because sometimes you have to stop following where everyone else is going and find your own way. The room went quiet. Not empty. Full. Your father was smarter than all of us, Han said softly. He just had the grace not to make it obvious. Maya smiled. Small. Sut. Proud. I wish I could have known that version of him. The one you knew. You did, Han said. He just wore different clothes when he came home. Outside, the city moved. Inside, debts that couldn't be measured were slowly, finally being paid. The turning point came quietly. No dramática non se ment. No bordrom confrontation. Just Han sitting in his office at 2 a.m., staring at financial reports that had always made sense before. Revenue streams. Asset acquisitions. Territory expansions. Numbers that represented choices. Choices that represented people. People he'd never had to see until a 10-year-old girl made him look. He picked up his phone. We're closing the loan operations, he said when Min-jae answered. No preamble. Silence on the other end. Chairman, those accounts represent. I know what they represent. Han's voice was calm. Final. Shut them down. Offer debt forgiveness to anyone who's paid more than the original principal. Liquidate the rest. The family won't understand. Then help them understand. He hung up. 3 weeks later, the resistance came. The Silver Crane Diner. Same booth. Same men. But the air felt different now. Charged. You're changing too much, too fast. Jae-won said carefully. People are asking questions. Let them ask. The loan operations generated clean revenue. No heat. No risk. Closing them makes us look weak. Han set down his coffee. It makes us look like we're evolving. Evolving into what? Tank's voice carried an edge. Rare for him. We're not a charity. We're not community outreach. We're... What? Han cut him off. What are we exactly? The table went silent. I'll tell you what we were, Han continued. We were men who profited from desperation. Who built wealth on the backs of people with no other options. We told ourselves it was just business. That everyone knew the terms. He leaned forward. But Northbound knew better. He knew that power without principle is just violence in a suit. And he spent 15 years trying to teach me that before he disappeared. So what? Min-jae's frustration surfaced. We become saints? We walk away from everything we built? No. We redirect it. Han's voice dropped. We built an empire. Now we decide what it's for. Around the table, doubt and loyalty warred on familiar faces. You're asking us to trust that this works, Jae-won said finally. I'm telling you it's happening whether you trust it or not. Han met each man's eyes. But I'd rather you walk this direction with me than watch from behind. One by one they nodded. Not convinced. But committed. Maya's birthday arrived on a Thursday. Han brought a small box wrapped in silver paper. Simple. Elegant. She opened it carefully, the way someone opens something they know matters. Inside, a thin leather bracelet. Dark brown, almost black. Hand-stitched. She lifted it, and candlelight caught the design stamped into the leather. A broken compass. What does it mean? She asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. Han knelt. The gesture that had become natural now, no longer shocking. It means when you see someone lost, you help them find their way. Even when it costs you something. Even when no one's watching. Even when it would be easier to keep walking. Maya studied the bracelet. Traced the broken needle with one finger. Like my dad did. Like your dad did. Han paused. And like I'm trying to do now. She fastened it around her wrist herself. No help needed. It fits perfectly. Good. Han stood. Because symbols only work if you carry them. If you let them remind you who you're supposed to be when everything else tries to tell you different. Diana watched from her bed. Sitting up now, color returning to her cheeks, breathing without mechanical assistance. Thank you, she said quietly. For all of this. For seeing what Elias saw in you. Han shook his head. He didn't see what was there. He saw what could be there. And then he spent 15 years making sure I didn't waste it. And now I'm trying to make sure his daughter knows that compasses can break and still point true. That direction matters more than destination. That power stops being dangerous when you finally figure out what it's for. Maya looked at her bracelet. At her mother. At the man who'd knelt in a diner and changed everything. I think my dad knew you'd figure it out eventually. Han smiled. Genuine. Unburdened. He had more faith than I deserved. Maybe that's what faith is, Maya said. Believing in someone before they believe in themselves. Years passed. Diana's cancer went into remission. Stayed there. Maya grew. Excelled. Asked harder questions that demanded better answers. Han's empire shifted. Not smaller. Different. Investments in communities instead of exploitation of them. Protection that didn't require payment. Power used as shelter rather than sword. The men who'd resisted eventually understood. Some even believed. And every Thursday at 8:15 a.m., Han sat in the same booth at the Silver Crane Diner, coffee black and unsweetened, the broken compass visible on his forearm. A reminder. A direction. A debt still being paid, one choice at a time. Until the morning a different child would walk through those doors and point to a mark that shouldn't exist, speaking words that would prove the same truth. Some tattoos don't fade. They just find new skin to live on. New people to guide home. 8 years later. The auditorium held 2,000 people, but Han sat in the back row anyway. No entourage. No security detail hovering nearby. Just him in a dark suit that cost less than it used to. In a seat no one would notice, watching a stage he had no official reason to be near. Maya Carter stood at the podium. 20 years old now. Graduating summa cum laude in social work. Hair pulled back in a style that was all her own. Professional but unapologetic. The blue jacket from that first morning was long gone, replaced by academic regalia that fit perfectly. But on her wrist, barely visible beneath the sleeve, a leather bracelet with a broken compass stamped into it. Worn thin from 8 years of daily wear. Never removed. The valedictorian had spoken for 12 minutes about achievement and ambition, about reaching for dreams and never settling. Maya's speech was different. My father died when I was 10 years old, she began, voice clear and steady, carrying to the back where Han sat motionless. He worked construction, paid bills, made terrible jokes, braided my hair even though he never quite got it right. Light laughter rippled through the crowd. But that's not the whole story. Maya paused. My father had another life before me. One he left behind so I could have a future that didn't include looking over my shoulder. So I could walk through doors he'd never get to walk through himself. The auditorium quieted. He taught me that direction matters more than destination. That power isn't about how much you can take. It's about what you choose to protect. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is change course, when you realize you're heading somewhere that'll destroy you. Fantastic tanat. When he died, I was angry. Angry that he left. Angry that he'd kept secrets. Angry that I had to figure out the world without him. Maya looked down at her notes. Didn't read them. But then someone reminded me what my father actually did. Not the job he had. Not the title people called him. But what he chose to be. She touched the bracelet on her wrist. He helped people find their way when they were lost. Even when it cost him everything. Especially then. 2,000 people leaned forward. We talk a lot about power in social work. About systemic power, institutional power, the power dynamics between helper and helped. But we don't talk enough about what power looks like when it stops being about control and starts being about direction. Her voice grew stronger. My father knew that. He knew that real strength isn't dominating people. It's walking into the dark first so others don't have to. It's choosing sacrifice over safety. It's breaking your own compass so you can help someone else find true north. In the back row, Han's hand moved to his forearm, to the serpent coiled around a broken compass, to ink that had meant violence once and meant something entirely different now. So here's what I want to say to everyone graduating today, Maya continued. You're about to walk into a world that will constantly ask you to choose between power and principle, between what's easy and what's right, between following the path everyone else takes and finding your own direction. She smiled. Proud. Certain. Choose direction. Every single time. Even when it costs you. Even when no one's watching. Even when the compass breaks and you have to navigate by something deeper than magnetic north. Her eyes scanned the crowd. Didn't find Han. He'd made sure of that. But the words landed anyway. My father chose direction. And because he did, I'm standing here. So are a lot of other people who never knew his name, but benefited from his choices. She gripped the podium. That's the kind of power that matters. Not the kind that makes people fear you. The kind that makes sure people don't walk alone. Silence. Then applause. Not polite. Thunderous. People stood. Faculty, family, fellow graduates. The sound rolled through the auditorium like a wave finding shore. Han didn't stand. Didn't clap. Just sat in the back row, watching the girl who'd walked into his diner 8 years ago wearing a jacket too thin for the weather, now standing on a stage wearing a future her father had paid for with his past. His eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. After the ceremony, as families swarmed the lawn and cameras flashed and futures felt impossibly bright, Diana found Han standing beneath an oak tree at the edge of campus. She knows you're here, Diana said. I know. She wanted you to sit with us. I know that too. Diana stood beside him, watching Maya pose for pictures with friends who had no idea what violence and sacrifice and broken compasses had bought this moment. Elias would be proud, she said quietly. Han's voice came out rough. Honest. He already was. That's why he did what he did. And you. Han looked at Diana. At the woman who'd refused charity 8 years ago and learned to accept something more complicated. Partnership and honoring a debt that couldn't be calculated. I'm just grateful he trusted me with this. With them. With the chance to walk a different direction. Diana nodded. They stood in silence as Maya laughed, as the sun angled low through spring leaves. As the future arrived right on schedule. Han turned to leave. She wants you at dinner tonight, Diana called after him. He paused. Looked back. I'll be there. Promise. Han touched the tattoo on his forearm. I promise. He walked toward the parking lot. Just another man in a dark suit, anonymous and unremarkable. Behind him, Maya's voice carried on the wind, still talking to friends about plans and hope and tomorrows that felt possible. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Some directions you feel rather than see. Some debts get paid in graduations and laughter, and futures that bloom from soil watered with sacrifice. And some broken compasses point true for generations. Pass from father to daughter to stranger to friend. Always asking the same question. When you see someone lost, will you help them find their way? Even when it costs you everything? Han's answer, finally, was yes. And that, more than empire, more than power, more than fear, was what Northbound had been walking toward all along. 20 years after the diner. Han Jae-sung was 73 years old, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Not exhausted. Not defeated. Just complete. The Silver Crane Diner still stood, though the booth near the window belonged to different men now. Younger. Hungrier. Still learning that power and control were different languages entirely. Han visited on Tuesdays now instead of Thursdays. Different routine. Same coffee. The tattoo on his forearm had faded. Ink blurring at the edges, serpent losing definition, compass bleeding into skin that had grown thin and spotted with time. But he could still trace every line in the dark. Still feel the weight of what it meant. Maya Carter Han, she'd hyphenated the name 5 years ago, over his protests, ran a legal advocacy nonprofit from an office in downtown Seoul. Not charity work. Justice work. She represented families caught between systems designed to grind them down. Immigrants facing deportación. Workers fired for organizing. Children removed from homes by agencies that moved too fast and cared too little. The kind of people her father had been before he became Northbound. The kind Han's empire had once preyed upon before a little girl pointed at a tattoo and asked a question that split his life in half. She visited him every Sunday. Not out of obligation. Out of choice. They'd have tea in his apartment overlooking the Han River. Smaller now than the penthouse he'd once owned, but with better light and fewer ghosts. You should slow down, he'd tell her, watching her scroll through case files on her tablet even during their time together. You sound like Mom. Your mother is wise. My mother worries too much. But Maya smiled. Set the tablet aside. How are you feeling? Old. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Han poured more tea. His hands shook slightly now. Parkinson's, the doctors said. Manageable. Progressive. Inevitable. Tell me about the Lee case. Maya's eyes lit up. Still that same spark from when she was 10. Asking questions that had no easy answers. We won the appeal. Family stays together. The agency has to implement new review protocols. Good. Better than good. It sets precedent. She paused. We couldn't have done it without your foundation's support. Han waved this away. The foundation exists because you insisted it should. I just sign the checks. You do more than that. I write apology letters in the form of tax-deductible donations. His smile was slight. Self-aware. It's the least dangerous thing I've ever done. Maya reached across the table. Took his trembling hand in both of hers. You know that's not true. Later, standing at the window watching the city lights multiply as dusk settled, Han spoke quietly. I used to think legacy meant leaving behind an empire. Something with my name on it. Something that would outlast me. Maya joined him at the window. And now I know empires crumble. Names fade. Buildings get torn down and replaced. He touched the tattoo on his forearm. Faded, blurred, barely visible in the dim light. But direction travels. It passes from person to person like a relay. Your father gave it to me. I tried to give it to you. And now you're giving it to people who'll never know either of our names. That bothers you? No. Han's voice carried something that might have been peace. That's exactly how it should work. Maya rested her head against his shoulder. Gesture from childhood that still fit despite decades and inches. Mom asks about you. Wants to know if you're eating properly. Han låg head. Your mother has spent 20 years trying to domesticate me. It's her longest-running failure. She'd say it's her greatest success. How is she? Good. Strong. Teaching again. She leads a support group for cancer survivors every Thursday night. Of course she does. Han's voice softened. She was always the strongest of us all. They stood in comfortable silence as the city breathed below them. Millions of people walking millions of directions, most never knowing how close they'd come to a different world. A harder one. I'm not your daughter, Maya said suddenly. Gently. I know. And you're not my father. I know that too. But your family. She squeezed his hand. The kind that's chosen. The kind that means something because it's chosen. Your father would be proud of who you've become. He'd be proud of who you've become too. I'm just trying to walk the direction he showed me. That's all any of us can do. Maya turned to face him. Pass it forward. Help someone else find their way. Break the compass, so they have to learn true north for themselves. 5 years later, Han Jae-sung died quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday morning. No drama. No violence. No final speeches. Just a man who'd walked far enough to finally rest. His funeral was small. Private. No Mafia connections. No political figures. No empire builders or territory holders. Just Maya and Diana. A handful of men who'd learned to walk differently, because he'd shown them how. Staff from the foundation. Families who'd been helped by resources they never knew came from reformed blood money. Maya stood at the front. No tears, just steady presence. He used to say that direction matters more than destination, she told them. That power stops being dangerous when you figure out what it's for. That some debts can't be paid, only honored. She touched the bracelet on her wrist. 28 years old now. Leather cracked and thin. Still there. So that's what we do. We honor it. We walk forward. We help people find their way. She looked at the closed casket. Rest well. You've earned it. And decades later, when another child would walk into another room and point at a faded mark on someone's skin, the same question would rise. What does it mean? And the answer would be the same. Direction. Sacrifice. Walking into the dark so others don't have to. Because legacy isn't a throne you sit on. It's a path you clear for people who'll never know your name. And some compasses, even broken ones, especially broken ones, point true forever. 34 years after the first morning. The Silver Crane Diner looked older now. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape. Coffee machine that rattled like it had emphysema. But the corner booth near the window still belonged to someone. Just different people taking turns holding the space. Han Jae-sung sat there alone on a Thursday morning. 78 years old. Hair completely white. Shoulders still broad but curved now, gravity winning the argument it always wins. His hands trembled as he lifted the porcelain cup. Black coffee unsweetened. Ritual unchanged even as everything else transformed. The tattoo on his forearm had faded to almost nothing. Ghost ink on ghost skin. But he could still feel every scale. Every broken line of the compass needle. The bell above the door rang. He looked up more slowly than he used to. Everything happened more slowly now. Maya walked in. 44 years old. Confidence that came from decades of fighting battles most people never saw. Hair pulled back professionally. Suit that meant business but wasn't trying to intimidate. And beside her, holding her hand, a little girl. Maybe 7. 8 at most. Dark curls pulled into 2 puffs. Yellow jacket bright against the diner's worn interior. Sneakers that lit up when she walked. Han's breath caught. Maya smiled, knowing gentle, and guided her daughter toward the booth. Uncle Han, she said, using the title they'd settled on years ago when friend felt insufficient and father belonged to someone else. There's someone I want you to meet. The little girl climbed onto the bench opposite him without hesitation, fearless in the way children are before the world teaches them caution. "This is my daughter Eliana," Maya said, sliding in beside her. "Ellie, this is the man I've told you about." Eliana studied him with eyes too old for her face. Assessing. Curious. Then her gaze dropped. To his forearm. To the faded serpent wrapped around a compass that barely existed anymore. She leaned forward, small hands pressing against the table. Pointed. "My grandfather had that tattoo." Time stopped. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just paused. Han's cup trembled in his grip. Coffee rippling in concentric circles that spread and faded and spread again. Maya's hand covered her mouth. Eyes glistening. "He did," Han said softly, voice cracking around the edges. "Your grandfather, Elias, he wore this mark first. A long time ago. Before you were born. Before your mother was born." Eliana nodded seriously. "Mommy showed me pictures. She said he was brave. He was the bravest man I ever knew. She said he helped people find their way when they were lost." Hans vision blurrat. He blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. That's exactly what he did. Eliana reached out, small hand impossibly small, and touched the faded ink on his forearm, traced the serpent's barely visible outline. "Why is the compass broken?" The question. Always the same question. Han looked at Ma. At the woman who'd walked into this diner 34 years ago, and changed everything. Who'd carried her father's legacy forward into courtrooms and advocacy offices, and a daughter's bedtime stories. "Because sometimes," he said, choosing his words carefully, "you have to stop following where everyone else goes. You have to break your own compass and find true north by yourself, so you can help other people do the same." That sounds hard. It is. Han smiled through tears. But it's the only thing that matters. Eliana studied the tattoo a moment longer, then looked up at him with devastating directness. "Are you going to help me find my way?" The question landed like a prayer. Like a promise. Like history folding back on itself and discovering it was never linear. Always circular, always returning, always asking the same thing in different voices. "Will you walk into the dark so I don't have to?" Han reached across the table, took Eliana's small hand in both of his trembling ones. "Yes," he said, voice steady despite everything. "For as long as I can. And when I can't anymore, your mother will. And when she can't, you'll do it for someone else. That's how this works." Like a relay? Exactly like a relay. Maya wiped her eyes. "Mom wanted to be here. She sends her love." "How is Diana?" "Still teaching. Still fierce. Still reminding me daily that stubbornness runs in our family." Han låghed vet. Broken. Genuina. "Thank your mother for me. For trusting me with all of this. For letting me be part of something that actually mattered." "You didn't just be part of it." Maya's voice was firm. "You carried it forward when my father couldn't. You made sure his direction didn't die with him." They stayed for an hour. Coffee and orange juice and pancakes Eliana ate with syrup-sticky fingers. Stories traded. Memories honored. Laughter that felt like healing. When they finally stood to leave, Eliana hugged Han with the unself-conscious affection of someone too young to understand that some people spent lifetimes never receiving gentleness. "Will you be here next Thursday?" she asked. "If I can," Han said honestly. "Promise you'll try?" He touched the faded compass on his arm. "I promise." They walked toward the door, bell chiming as they pushed through into morning sunlight. Han watched them go. Watched Maya take her daughter's hand. Watched them walk forward into a future built on foundations they'd never fully see or understand. Just trust existed because someone else had poured them decades ago. He lowered himself back into the booth, lifted his coffee cup, and thought about a question he'd been asked 34 years ago by a girl in a blue jacket. "Were you bad?" His answer had been, "I was dangerous." But sitting alone in a diner where ghosts felt more real than the present, where legacy walked in wearing light-up sneakers, where a broken compass still pointed true despite fading into skin and memory, he had a different answer now. "I was lost. Until someone showed me the way. And then I spent the rest of my life making sure others wouldn't walk alone. Some marks don't rule the world. They keep it from losing its way. And some sentences, impossible, devastating, redemptive, echo across generations. My father had that same tattoo. My grandfather had that same tattoo. Someday, my great-grandfather had that same tattoo. Not because the ink lasts, but because direction does. Always.